So, I recently just saw the Napoleon movie, and honestly, I quite liked it, which was kind of surprising because I've seen historical movies and they've gotten a lot of things wrong, which has annoyed me. But this movie actually got a lot of things correct. Um, so, just a warning, if you haven't seen the movie, go watch it for yourself. Consider this a spoiler warning. Even though you may know what actually happens in real life history, still gotta say it. So, back to what we're doing. This movie was quite interesting because it's my first time watching a Napoleon movie. I haven't seen the one in 1970, this is the only one I've seen. And I knew the history before watching it, and it was really good. However, one thing is that they got wrong was when he was in Egypt, he did not leave Egypt because he found out that his wife was cheating on him. Instead, what he actually did is that's when he started going around having affairs in revenge, basically. The reason why he left is because his troops were being defeated in Egypt by not only the Ottomans but the British as well, I believe. So he left his troops and went back to France. He used this as a propaganda boost. He said, "Oh, it wasn't a loss, it wasn't a defeat, it was a strategic withdrawal, basically." And he was still met with open arms and considered a hero by the people of France. Now, besides from that, let's talk about his most, how do I put this? His most famous battlefield success. I'm going to show you a clip of the battle of the three emperors, and I'm going to be silent for that time. Hold on, let me just pull it up right now.
Wait! Let them think they have the higher ground. Send in the infantry! Take their position on the higher ground! Cavalry from the west! Pierce their flanks! Retreat! Withdraw! Nice! It's a trap! Uncover the cannon! Retreat!
And I'm back. So, I'm really glad that they put this battle into the movie because it it could be argued it was one of Napoleon's greatest achievements. He was completely outnumbered, as you saw, by a massive portion of the Russian and Austrian armies, yet he still won the battle. something you need to understand about Napoleon is he didn't fight conventionally of the time. He used the environment to his benefit. Like, as you saw, he destroyed the ice from underneath them while they were fleeing. Most emperors and generals at the times that took place in would not have done that. They wouldn't have even thought of it. They would have just sent wave after wave of line infantry to attack along with the cavalry. And you can see that that happened for ages. There were like 5 coalition wars against Napoleon. He lost the fifth one, and but he won all the previous ones. And you have to understand, it's like Napoleon was a genius of his time, but he didn't follow the rules. He didn't care about how they've been fighting for centuries. He used whatever trick he can think of. Oh, you're retreating on ice? Let me knock the ice out from underneath you. You wait for supply lines? No, I'm going to harvest all the food and resources I can from this town I conquered so I can push forward and outmaneuver your troops. That's the difference. That's one of the reasons why he was so good and he was so brilliant in his time. But let's take a step back. This is the coup scene from the movie. What is correct is this is before he became first consul. For people who don't know, he became first consul and then he became emperor. So at the time, it was still I want to say democratic, but most likely not government, was currently in charge. They had taken him to a remote palace outside of Paris. Palace outside of Paris. Huh, that's funny. Where Napoleon's most loyal troops met him there. And they basically said, you're going to change the constitution because you have no choice. I have hundreds, possibly even thousands of soldiers here, ready to do what I command. You're going to change it. The original plan was to have 3 consuls in charge of France to make sure not a single person can be the ruler. However, Napoleon did some backstage and last-minute adjustments to the constitution, which made him first consul. The other 2 consuls were in power, but they could do basically nothing to him because he had, let's just say, nearly all the power. And the funny thing is in this scene is that it accurately depicts what happened. He had no idea what was going on. The government had no idea what was going on. His troops had no idea. Everyone had no idea what was going on. They knew it was a coup, but no one knew what to do. And I'm a poet, and I didn't even know it. So there was a lot of fighting, a lot of confusion, but eventually the government signed the new constitution into law. And that was Napoleon's beginning of becoming emperor. So now let's jump forward again, sorry. You have to understand, before the Battle of the Three Emperors occurred, Napoleon was emperor. However, the other emperors of Europe saw him as a peasant still. So he was desperate to make his mark, which led him to the Battle of the Three Emperors, which certainly did leave his mark. But he was also obsessed with Tsar Alexander of Russia. He wanted to secure an alliance with him so bad, and his obsession started to become borderline creepy. Napoleon once said to Josephine, I believe, that if Tsar Alexander was a woman, I would make him my mistress. He was really obsessed with Alexander. It was really weird. But eventually he did get the alliance with Russia that he wanted. Now, you have to remember, Russia at the time was a juggernaut. Had practically an unlimited army. So whoever had Russia on their side was practically destined to win. But you may be thinking, how did he secure an alliance with Russia when they've just been fighting each other? So, with the peace deal he wrote with Russia, he only took a tiny bit of territory and allowed Russia to invade Finland. Finland at the time was under the control of Sweden. Now this is important. With Finland now under Russian control, it weakens Sweden. Sweden overthrows their monarchy, so Napoleon sends one of his marshals over to take his place, and he becomes the new king of Sweden. Now Sweden is now allied to, guess who? Napoleon. Now, he controls all of mainland Europe practically. He defeated the Germans. They're now basically under occupation. The Austrians are now forced to have an alliance with Napoleon. But Britain is still at war. They refuse to surrender. Well, we could say that Britannia rules the waves. So, here we go. Now, since Britain still has the strongest navy in the world, he needs an alliance. He has already sold Louisiana to the Americans, which was a massive purchase. The Americans were only prepared to buy a single city, but he sold the entire Louisiana territory because he needed the money. Now, he needs an alliance with someone who has a big navy. Russia doesn't have a big navy. France has a decent navy. However, Spain still has a massive navy. Even though their armada was sunk in the 1600s, they still have a relatively big and powerful navy. So he allies with Spain, and everything is going well. They're slowly getting more power over Britain's navy. However, it all fails during the Battle of Trafalgar. So, the French and the Spanish navies are fighting the British Navy at the Battle of Trafalgar. However, the British admiral in charge decides to split up the forces by basically ramming his ships into the columns of the Spanish and the French, which eventually leads to basically the entire French and Spanish fleets sunk, still leaving Britain as the number one naval superpower. Now, at this point, Napoleon realizes that he cannot possibly win against Britain because he can't get his soldiers over to invade Britain because of he doesn't have the navy to do it. So he thinks of the continental system. The continental system, or the continental blockade, is all of France's allies and uh, puppets, I want to say, agree to embargo Britain, no longer trading with them, hoping to starve Britain out of money, forcing them to make peace. However, here's the problem. A lot of people did not like this because it started hurting them instead of Britain. Such as Russia, but we'll come back to them later. During this blockade, Spain had a national schism. The King of Spain's son overthrew him, and the king was allied to Napoleon. However, the son wasn't as loyal, and in Napoleon's eyes, Spain was a pain. I'm a comedian. I'm so hilarious. So, Napoleon marched thousands upon thousands of troops into Spain and tried to sort out who would be king of Spain. However, at the end of negotiations, he claimed the throne of Spain for himself. However, this would turn out to be a very bad idea. A lot of the Spanish people did not like a foreign king ruling over them, or a foreign emperor to be exact. So they started to engage in guerrilla warfare, which Napoleon had no idea how to fight against. Now that this is all happening, how do I put this? All this is happening, it has a lot of his best soldiers in Spain, and they're stuck there. They can't leave, otherwise Spain will fall. However, he eventually invades Portugal as well, because Portugal was still trading with Britain, keeping their economy afloat. So he invades Portugal thinking it's going to be an easy win. And that, there we go, one less person to trade with England. However, Spain, who is still fighting Napoleon's rule, helps Portugal, and those two stand strong. Now he's just created a new front line that needs even more troops to handle. And this front line will stay open until he is exiled from France to the island of Elba. But you may be thinking, oh come on, how did Napoleon, the military genius, fail to beat two countries like that when he's taken on a lot bigger and a lot stronger countries and won? You have to remember, these civilians that were fighting him and his brother, Napoleon's brother could have been the new king of Spain under Napoleon's rule, because Napoleon didn't want to rule Spain because it would take too much attention away. But back to the point. You have to remember, these civilians were fighting guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare is really hard to deal with because a conventional war against guerrilla fighters just doesn't work. We've seen time and time again, it does not work. And now that he's created front line, and he's the enemy of Portugal and Spain, who is also the enemy of France. That's right, Britain. Britain sends soldiers into Spain and Portugal to hold off the French. So even though the French have better tactics, they can't break through the line because of the amount of British forces there and the guerrilla fighters. Now, this front line will stay open and continuously bleed Napoleon of his best men. Now, this plays a massive part in his downfall. Now, back to Russia. Russia's economy was struggling because they were a massive trade partner of Britain, and since they no longer had Britain to trade with, they needed help. Their economy was suffering. As you can see with this beautiful map I have put up on the screen, not my map by the way, everything that has outlined red is part of Napoleon's rule practically, and it's the continental blockade, I believe. So roughly at this time, Spain and Portugal are fighting his rule. The Germans do not like him. The Polish don't like him. Austria is forced to work with him. Now Russia, they break away from the continental blockade and begin trading with Britain and start taxing French imports and exports because they need the money. However, Napoleon is still obsessed with Alexander, sees this as a personal betrayal by him. So he marches 650,000 troops from Austria, Poland, some Germans, and France, and possibly even some Italians, I don't know for sure, into Russia to try to bring it under control again. Initially, the battles go quite well. However, everything comes to a halt when they reach Moscow. And I have a clip from the movie that I want you to watch.
Who did this?
They did.
No, they did not. Be sensible. Who set these fires?
Your Majesty. They did.
He'd rather burn his own city than negotiate with me. I didn't think he had the courage. Well, we'll go to St. Petersburg and have him burn that too.
We have let too much time slip away. We would be marching into the Russian winter with horses that are not raised for this weather. If we go back to Poland, we can wait out the winter months. Hmm?
As you saw, his troops entered Moscow. Moscow was completely abandoned. However, he thought there would be a massive fight, because you have to understand, Moscow was a very religious city, a sacred city to the Russians. So he thought that if he could take Moscow, he could force Alexander's hand to make peace once again and bring him back under control. However, when he entered and he went to sleep for the night, the Russian officials had already released prisoners from their cells and told them to burn the city to the ground. But you may be thinking, like, why does Napoleon care? It's not one of his cities, it's only going to affect Russia. Here's the thing, his tactics relied on taking cities and taking anything that they could to feed their troops, to supply their troops, so they can keep pushing without needing the supply lines. Because supply lines take a long time. If you take a long time, that means the enemy has more chance to regroup, think of a plan to stop you, right? But with Moscow burnt, he had nothing to take. He didn't have time to push to the capital of St. Petersburg, where Alexander was, because of the Russian winter coming. So his only chance was to get supplies brought in from Poland to Moscow to feed his troops. However, this would prove not possible. As you can see from the map, Poland is a long way from Moscow, which you can't even see on the map, but hopefully you know where it is. So, as the supply lines were going, the Cossacks were elite Russian guerrilla fighters practically. They would ride in on their horses, slaughter everyone, and take the supplies for themselves. They would hit the French supply lines constantly and that hard that the supply lines could not supply Napoleon's forces. So, Napoleon is faced with a very hard choice. Retreat back to Poland and give up all of the land he's fought so hard for. Or he stays in Moscow, where he may freeze to death and die. Ultimately, he chose to give up his conquered territory and return to Poland to wait out the winter. However, on the way they hit constantly with ambushes and attacks, and by the time they reach Poland, of the 650,000 men he takes in, less than 80,000 come out. Now, this is seen as a massive failure, and the French government can't turn a blind eye to their emperor, who has cost them hundreds of thousands of men. They give up and they force Napoleon to abdicate. Finally, the war in Europe is over. Napoleon is defeated and he is exiled to the island of Elba, which you can currently see on this map, just off the coast of Corsica, the island of Corsica, and the Italian peninsula. Right up, now where can I say, near north of Rome. They exile him there, which absolutely humiliates Napoleon and his wife, well, his ex-wife, because he divorced her by now. His ex-wife, Josephine, isn't allowed to come with him. And his new wife and his kid of Austrian descent, and they're part of the Austrian imperial family, aren't allowed to come with him either. He's sent to Elba. He's called the Emperor of Elba, and he's stuck there by himself with his most loyal soldiers. Now this would be a turning point of his career. So now Napoleon is on Elba. He's lost everything. He's stuck in exile, and all of his conquests are over. At Elba, he learns of his love of Josephine. She dies in France. This heartbreaks him. He locks himself away in a room for 2 days and refuses to talk to anyone. But after this, he decides, I'm going back to France to claim what is mine. So he commandeers a ship, brings all of his troops and as much as he can, and sails back to France. The newly appointed king of France hears of Napoleon's return, and he's fearful, because you have to understand that at the time of Napoleon's exile, the king of France was Louis the Seventh, I think. Anyway, King Louis. He is not popular amongst the French people. Among the French people, he's not popular at all. However, Napoleon is still quite popular. So he dispatches soldiers to go intercept Napoleon and hopefully kill him, because he threatens his rule. However, the soldiers that were dispatched fought alongside Napoleon, and when they were given the order to shoot Napoleon, they refused, and they ran to Napoleon's side and begged for his forgiveness, and that, we are sorry, we will fight for you until the end. Napoleon eventually reaches Paris, where he reclaims his throne. The rest of Europe sees this and says, not again. So they all declare war on Napoleon himself, not the country of France, Napoleon as a person. So he decides to make a final stand at a town named Waterloo. Napoleon had a force of roughly 120,000 French people. However, he was severely outnumbered, as the British had about 70,000, which he was fighting, and the Germans under General Blucher were arriving with a force much more powerful than that. So Napoleon splits his forces in two. He sends one to delay Blucher as much as possible, while he wipes out the British, and then he'll meet up and wipe out Blucher. However, this plan fails severely, because the allies of Britain and Germany and the rest of Europe, including Sweden, whose king is one of Napoleon's old marshals, are fighting against Napoleon. They have learned his tactics. They know what he's going to do. He has become predictable. So, during the Battle of Waterloo, which was Napoleon's final battle, he loses severely. He is captured by the British and sent into exile once more to the island of St. Helena. Helena? Let me check. Helena. Sorry, St. Helena. St. Helena is located off the coast of southwest Africa, nowhere near, nowhere near France, nowhere he's gonna get back. But just in case, the British deploy 2,000 armed soldiers to guard Napoleon 24/7. Napoleon is not allowed to bring a single soldier with him. He may bring some close friends, that's it. But there's also to make sure he never escapes, not only from the 2,000 men I previously mentioned, but also there are 2 British warships circling the island 24/7 to make sure that he stays on the island. Napoleon is also forced to attend roll call every day, twice a day, to make sure he's still present. This is where he would eventually die in 1821. While he is there, this is where all the memes of depressed Napoleon, those paintings come from him during his exiles. But this is where he writes his memoir to tell history, his side of it. I don't have it now, and I'm not going to read it because I don't have the time. But I do recommend, if you want to learn more, you should go check it out for yourself. But remember, it's from his side. He is known to exaggerate stuff, and he always changes stuff to make it suit better. So if you do read his memoir, make sure you read other people's memoirs and cross-reference them to get the true picture. But he dies in 1821, in his 50s. Now that he's dead, the world is finally no longer concerned with his return. Now, Napoleon's legacy still lives on because how he fought his wars, his tactics, were the birthplace of modern warfare. No more line infantry, no more cavalry charges that would just do to wipe out infantry. It would eventually pave the way for the attack of trench warfare. But that's a long and another story. So, after this entire video and me explaining what happened, my only wish that the Napoleon movie mentioned was some more of his battles, because his battles contributed a lot to his rise and downfall. So did his obsession with Josephine. Yes, I know that, but we've seen so many ones of his obsession with Josephine. I just wish they would have added some more battles, like the Battle of Spain, because you can't fight a war if all of your trained forces are dead. Well, anyway, if you've gone this far in the video, thank you so much. If you like it, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, and thank you again so much. This is Did You Know? And that's the end of the video. Thank you and goodbye.